There's a particular kind of tired that has nothing to do with sleep. It shows up after a phone call you didn't want to take, a favor you agreed to while every part of you wanted to refuse, a conversation where you smiled and nodded and felt yourself shrinking by the minute. You were nice. You're always nice. And somewhere on the drive home, or lying awake that night, a quiet thought arrives that you push away almost as fast as it comes. I'm so tired of these people. Not strangers. The ones you keep showing up for. The ones who take your patience as permission. You tell yourself that being nice is who you are, that good people don't keep score, that the discomfort is just the cost of being kind. But the exhaustion keeps coming back. And it is trying to tell you something you haven't wanted to hear. If this is already landing, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from today. Friedrich Nietzsche spent a good part of his life suspicious of exactly this feeling and of the word we use to hide it. He looked at the people everyone called good, the agreeable ones, the ones who never cause friction, and he asked a question almost nobody asks. What if much of what we call kindness is just fear wearing better clothes? Fear of conflict, fear of being disliked, fear of what happens if we stop performing. Nietzsche had a specific target. He distrusted pity. The German word is Mitleid, which literally means suffering with, and he argued that it quietly drains the vitality of the person who feels it. A great deal of so-called compassion, he thought, is really a way of making yourself feel useful or moral or needed. That does not mean he wanted people to be cruel. It means he refused to let weakness call itself virtue. When you cannot say no, that is not goodness. When you give until you resent the person you gave to, that is not love. He called the morality of the agreeable crowd herd morality, the ethics of people who feel safe only when they look like everyone else and offend no one. So the real question underneath all of this is not how to become colder. It is what was actually holding those relationships together in the first place. Because when you finally stop being nice to the wrong people, you find out fast. Some things survive it. Some things were never there at all. And the difference between the two is one of the most honest pieces of information you will ever receive about your own life. The first thing that happens is the quietest. People begin to drift, and at first it frightens you. You stopped answering every message within the hour. You said no to the thing you always said yes to. And one by one, certain people grow distant, then vanish, and the silence makes you wonder if you made a terrible mistake. Nietzsche would tell you to watch this closely because it is information. He believed a person's real character shows itself the moment you stop being useful to them. The friend who only appeared when they needed something. The relative whose warmth ran exactly as deep as your willingness to absorb their problems. Losing them feels like loss. It usually isn't. You didn't lose a relationship. You discovered there wasn't one. A connection that collapses the instant you have needs of your own was already gone. You were just the last to be told. The second thing that happens is that you notice the weight you were carrying by the strange feeling of its absence. For years you ran a quiet, constant calculation in the back of your mind. How will this land? Are they upset? Should I soften that? Should I apologize for something I didn't even do just to keep the peace? You did it so automatically you stopped registering it as effort. This is the drain Nietzsche pointed to. He saw chronic self-erasure as something that slowly lowers a person's vitality, a tax on the life force taken in amounts so small you never see the deduction. You were spending energy translating yourself into a more acceptable shape every day for people who never once did the same for you. When you stop, the energy comes back. Not all at once, but ordinary things stop exhausting you. A conversation can simply end without a knot forming in your stomach. You were never short on stamina. You were doing two jobs in every interaction, being present and managing how you were received. The third thing that happens is harder. Some people don't drift quietly. They get angry. The moment you set a limit, the person who relied on your compliance reacts with an intensity wildly out of proportion to a simple no. Suddenly you're selfish. You've changed. You're not the person they thought you were. Nietzsche gave this reaction a name. He called it ressentiment, the resentment of those who feel powerless and turn that powerlessness into a moral weapon. The person who benefited from your self-sacrifice does not experience your boundary as fair. They experience it as theft because something they counted on has been taken from them. So they reframe it, and you become the villain for refusing a role you never agreed to play. Here is the part to hold on to. The size of someone's anger when you stop overgiving is a measure of how much they were taking. Calm people adjust. People who were exploiting the arrangement escalate because the arrangement was working for them. Their outrage is not proof that you did something wrong. It is the receipt for everything you had quietly been handing over. If this video is giving you something to think about, subscribe and turn on notifications. It helps us keep making content like this. The fourth thing that happens is that you finally feel the difference between being kind and being nice, and you realize they were never the same. Niceness is about the surface of the interaction. It wants everyone comfortable, including you, and it will trade the truth for that comfort every time. Kindness is something else. Kindness can look you in the eye and tell you the thing you don't want to hear because it is oriented toward your actual good rather than your momentary ease. Nietzsche admired this harder thing. He thought the friend worth having was the one who could be an honest adversary when you needed one, not a mirror that agreed with everything you said. For most of your life, you confused the two. You thought your endless agreeableness made you good. It mostly made you safe. When you stop being nice to the wrong people, you don't become cruel. You become capable of the truth. You start saying what you mean to the people who can handle it, and you stop wasting careful honesty on people who only ever wanted your applause. The fifth thing cuts closer because it is no longer about them. It is about you. At some point in this process, you catch yourself in an uncomfortable recognition. A lot of your niceness was not generosity at all. It was avoidance. It was easier to say yes than to tolerate the discomfort of someone being disappointed in you. It was easier to absorb the unfair thing than to risk the confrontation. You called yourself selfless, and underneath it you were managing your own fear. Nietzsche saw this clearly and refused to flatter it. He argued that people constantly dress up their weaknesses as virtues, that the man who cannot retaliate calls himself forgiving, that the one who is afraid to act calls his paralysis patience. This is the point most people never reach because it requires admitting that the role of the good, agreeable person was protecting you from something. The discomfort you avoided, the disapproval you couldn't stand. Stopping is not just about cutting off the people who took advantage. It is about giving up a story you told about yourself, the flattering one, where your inability to disappoint anyone was proof of your goodness rather than the shape of your fear. The sixth thing happens slowly, and it can be lonely before it becomes anything else. You get harder to love in the easy way. The people who valued you only because you were convenient no longer find you convenient, and they lose interest, and for a while the room is emptier than it used to be. This is the cost, and there is no point pretending it away. Nietzsche never promised that becoming yourself would make you popular. He suggested the opposite. The person who stops performing for the crowd will be misunderstood by the crowd, and will have to learn to live without the constant low hum of everyone's approval. But something takes its place. The people who remain are there for you, not for the service you provided. The connections that survive the change are the only ones that were ever real. You trade a large number of shallow attachments for a small number of true ones, and almost everyone who has made that trade says the same thing afterward. They did not know how loud the noise was until it stopped. The seventh thing is the one nobody warns you about. Once you stop, you cannot go back to not knowing. The exhaustion was useful while you ignored it, because ignoring it let you keep the peace. But you've seen it now. You've watched who left the moment you stopped being useful, and who got angry the moment you set a limit, and who was still there when there was nothing left to gain. You can never unsee that ledger. From here on, every time you override yourself to keep someone comfortable, you will know exactly what you are doing and exactly what it costs. That is the real weight of this. Not that other people change, that you can no longer pretend you don't notice. So what do you do with all of this? Not the soft answer, the one that tells you to set boundaries and love yourself and surround yourself with your tribe. Nietzsche didn't deal in that. His answer was harder and, in the end, more freeing. He said that before a person can become anything, they have to learn to say no. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he described the spirit moving through three forms. First, the camel, the beast that kneels down and says, "Load me up," the one who carries every burden handed to it and feels virtuous for the weight. Then the camel goes into the desert and becomes the lion, and the lion exists for one reason: to win the freedom to create by speaking what Nietzsche called the sacred no. The no to obligation that was never yours. The no to the should that other people installed in you. The no to being the one who carries everyone. The lion cannot create anything yet. It cannot build a new thing, but it can clear the ground, and the ground cannot be cleared by a creature that only ever says yes. That is what your exhaustion was. It was the camel realizing it had been kneeling for years, taking on every load because refusing felt like a sin. The shift Nietzsche points to is not learning to hate the people you use to please. It is becoming the lion long enough to say the no that protects the thing you haven't built yet. Because that yes you gave to everyone automatically, indiscriminately, was not free. Every yes to the wrong person was a no to something else. Your time, your work, the people who actually deserve the energy you were spending on those who didn't. You were generous with the wrong people because it was easier than being honest with yourself about what you wanted your life to be. Nietzsche borrowed a line from an ancient poet and made it his own. Become who you are, not who you were trained to be. Not the agreeable, accommodating, endlessly available version that kept everyone comfortable and left you hollow on the drive home. The self underneath all that managing is still there, and it has been waiting for you to stop spending it on people who would have dropped you the moment you stopped being useful. You don't owe the world a softer version of yourself. You never did. When you stop being nice to the wrong people, you don't lose your kindness. You stop wasting it. You aim it. You give it to the few who would give it back, and you stop bleeding it into the ones who only ever held out a cup. The tiredness lifts. The room gets quieter, and then, slowly, it gets better. And the next time that old guilt rises up to tell you that a good person would have just said yes, you will recognize it for what it always was. Not your conscience, just your fear, asking for one more favor. The eighth thing happens in your own mouth, and it surprises you. You stop explaining yourself. For years, every no came wrapped in a paragraph of justification. You couldn't simply decline. You had to build a case, list your reasons, offer the apology in advance, soften the refusal until it barely qualified as one. You believed the explanation was politeness. It was permission-seeking. You were asking the other person to agree that your no was allowed. Nietzsche drew a line between two kinds of people, and the distinction was exactly this. The noble type, as he described it, acts from his own center and does not wait for the world to ratify his choices. The other type lives in reaction, always measuring himself against what others will accept. When you stop being nice to the wrong people, the paragraph falls away. No becomes a complete sentence. You notice that the people who respected you never needed the essay, and the people who demanded it were the ones who had been using your need to be understood as a handle to pull you back. The relief of this is hard to describe to someone who has never lived inside the constant low effort of pre-justifying their own existence. You stop narrating your reasons to people who are only ever looking for the seam to pry open. The ninth thing is that they test you. The drift, the anger, the cooling, none of it is always the end. Often there's a return. The person who pulled away comes back warm, as if nothing happened, with a small request that is really a probe. They're checking whether the old arrangement is still available, whether the door you closed has quietly swung open again. This is the moment most people fail because the warmth is genuinely pleasant and the guilt is genuinely loud. And saying yes just once feels like such a small thing. Nietzsche understood the pressure here better than almost anyone. He wrote that the herd treats the one who steps out of line as a kind of threat, and that it will use every soft instrument it has to bring the exception back into the fold. Approval is the bait. Belonging is the bait. The relief of being liked again is the bait. Holding your position the second time is harder than the first, because the first time you were running on momentum and the second time you're choosing it cold, with the reward sitting right in front of you. But this is where the change actually sets. A boundary that bends the moment someone smiles at you is never a boundary. It was a delay. The wrong people are not testing whether you meant it. They are testing whether you will pay to feel accepted again. And the day you decline that particular purchase is the day the old pattern finally loses its grip on you. There is something underneath all 9 of these that deserves to be said plainly, because it is the part that keeps people stuck even after they understand everything else. Losing the wrong people hurts even when you know they were wrong. You can see clearly that the friendship was hollow, that the relative was using guilt as a leash, that the colleague valued you exactly as much as you were useful. It still aches when they go. The mind understands before the body does. You will grieve relationships that your reason knows were not worth keeping. This is normal, and pretending otherwise is its own small lie. Nietzsche did not ask people to feel nothing. He asked them to stop letting the feeling make the decision. He had a phrase for the highest form of strength he could imagine, a more fatty, a love of one's fate, a willingness to look at everything that has happened, including the losses, including the people who left, and to want it as the necessary shape of the life that produced you. That is not the same as being glad they hurt you. It is the refusal to spend the rest of your years wishing the truth had been kinder. The people who left when you stopped being convenient were always going to leave. You simply moved the date forward and spared yourself years of paying for a connection that would have collapsed under the first real demand anyway. Grieve it if you need to, then let it be what it was. And there's a quieter cost that arrives later, once the dust settles. You become harder to manipulate, and a certain kind of person can feel that from across a room. They sense that the old tools won't work on you, that the guilt slides off, that the flattery doesn't move you the way it used to. Some of them simply leave you alone after that, which is the outcome you wanted. But a few will resent you for it in a way that has nothing to do with anything you did. Nietzsche saw this resentment as almost structural, the reaction of people whose entire strategy depends on others being pliable. Your clarity is an inconvenience to them. Your steadiness is an insult to a way of operating that only functions on people who can be moved. You will not be able to make those people comfortable again without becoming useless to yourself, and at some point you stop trying. That is not coldness. It is the simple recognition that you cannot be both fully yourself and endlessly available to people who only value the availability. Thank you for watching. More videos are on your screen now, and if you haven't already, subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.